I have the great pleasure this morning to introduce to you Arlene Audergon, who has come up from London to be with us over the weekend. And Arlene is co-founder of the training arm of the Research Society for Process-Oriented Psychology. Now, process-oriented psychology was developed by Arnold Mindell, and some of you, I can see, are familiar with the work of Mindell. But Arlene will be telling us a little bit more about process-oriented psychology. Come on in. Process-oriented psychology in her talk. Arlene also is the co-founder and director of C4, which is Force for Change. And it's an organization that is devoted to the resolution of conflict and the creative work with conflict in communities around Europe, around the world. Arlene, is that
Europe
fair to
and
say?
the world.
Europe and the world.
Yeah. More
yes.
in Europe, yeah.
And Arlene is a psychotherapist, and she has her own private practice in London. So, Arlene, without further ado, I look forward to your talk, and fire away.
Thank you very much. It's nice being here, and I'm always just a little bit nervous when I speak, no matter how many times I'm in front of groups. It's part of it, I think, and it's a privilege to be here. First, a big thank you to Jessica for your invitation. Am I speaking loud enough? Is it coming? For your invitation to me. Also for all of the endless work you're doing, organizing and behind the scenes, and all others who are joining you in that, who I can't name personally, but it's always such an immense work gathering people together, and I think never gets thanked enough or seen enough, and I just want to say thank you. Probably on behalf of all of us, yeah. And just to say, I really am happy to be among a group that's interested in transpersonal psychology. I like that I get to be here. And to maybe also mention and honor that this conference, to name again, that this conference is honoring the life and the work of David Fontana. And I wanted to just start with a very little story about how I got here, actually, which is I have a tendency to get involved in a lot of things, and they're usually coming from something deep in me that moves me, but then as I hope I'm not the only one with this experience, you probably know it, that the thing gets a life of its own, and everything always seems bigger than it was originally. And I find myself often a bit too busy and overwhelmed, and I know that can also be a privilege to have that, but some of you may resonate with that experience of getting kind of tangled up in yourself. One day I was just feeling that and just out of touch. What am I doing? Why am I doing all of this? And so I stopped, and I was at my computer. I stopped and I sat down and I meditated and I did some inner work. And it was some stuff came up for me about needing to say no, actually, and choose and priorities and things like that. But the upshot was that I got in contact with something very deep in myself, a kind of still place of recalling, and reminding myself of my deepest spiritual nature, and that I really need to, not that it's a new learning, but it's one of those new learnings again, to come from there and to be able to speak from my deepest nature, spiritual nature, and not be shy of that, something like that. So I was sitting there, and it felt like, that made sense. I was ready to go back. And then there was a ping in the computer. And I looked up, and it was a message from Jessica saying, would you like to come talk at the Transpersonal conference? So with that sort of synchronicity and warmth of your invitation, I felt really welcome. So I guess this dry mouth also is part of that nervousness, too, that comes. Excuse me. I was also, when I was orienting myself coming here, I was looking at some of the work of David Fontana, which I had not been familiar with, and I looked at the most recent book of his, I think it's most recent about near-death experiences and experiences after death, or possible experience, understanding experiences after death. And I was reading it, and it made me recall experiences with my own mother. And today, actually, is the second anniversary of my mom's death. And so it's a very important day for me as well. And may bring up for you also your own memories and people close to you. But as I was reading it, I was very, very close to her, and went through some deep experiences with her near the end of her life, through illness, which she actually recovered from and had another year, and then when she was dying. And but then I had some experiences with her also after experiences I had after she passed, and whether those are my own inner life or with her, I don't know. But at first there was a sense of some sort of disorientation, that she might be lost or something like that. We'd have a little bit of contact. And then, well, there were many aspects, but then at a certain point, I hadn't felt anything. And then suddenly one day I had this sense I felt her, and I said, hi, hey, you know, like, how are you doing? And she said, oh, I'm so busy. And I thought, busy? I thought maybe this is the one thing that I wouldn't have to have after I die. And she goes, I'm just so busy. And she said, there's so much learning here. And she goes, it's like I'm in this there's something like a big library here. It's hard to describe. They were like words, but communication to me, but it was something like there's this big library. And it's not the library that just has books in it that people write, but it's a library that has all of the experiences of everybody who's ever lived in this library. And you get to learn so much, and it builds such a compassion in you, she said. And I was still touched when I remember it, the joy that I felt in her. And so then I was connecting, and I thought, well, this does have to do with my talk that is about individual and collective awareness. And I thought, in a biggest sense, or in some sense, this image of a library I like as a sense of that there's a field of consciousness that we share, and that each unique experience is so important in that field. And also I think I like that there's that sense of learning and awareness, that not just experience, but it's experience and the awareness and learning out of that touches me. So let me say a little bit more about what I'd like to talk about today more specifically. I'm thinking about consciousness and these big questions, but I want to particularly look at the idea of collective as well as individual consciousness in terms of, can a group become conscious of itself? Can a community work on itself and become aware of itself? It links a bit with what Anthony was speaking about, Gaia, of course. But also in a very practical sense, how can groups meet and become more aware? And then what is the role of us in the field of psychology, in the field of transpersonal psychology, in facilitating processes that are social and political processes in society, rather than being only somehow, well, to realize it's very central, that our role is very central to the discussions and processes that are also social and political. So I'm thinking that I just wanted to sort of name that I notice in my practice, I don't know if that's just me, but I don't think so. I think it's kind of a time spirit that people who come to me in individual psychotherapy are often talking, and I love being with private clients. I'm kind of an introvert at heart. It makes part of my shyness. But I love being with people and going into the deepest source with people and taking outer issues and working on them individually. But what I notice is a lot of people coming to me saying that they're interested in finding out their work in the world that would be congruent with who they really are, their deepest spirit, and bringing it out in the world. And that they're looking for that. And then at the same time, I'm also meeting a lot of people in my work more with, in circles of international development or a more political or large organizations, people like this who are more active in the outer social and political work, who are saying they want to focus more on the internal and their own awareness of themselves personally. So I have this sense of a kind of maybe more of an integration of what may have seemed more separate before, that's becoming a direction that would be linking. Do you know what I mean? Do you have something like that? Yeah. So, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me see. And so I just wanted to kind of frame that I think, like in a group like this, it's maybe, hopefully, safe to say, or maybe even in the wider society now, that we can kind of understand the idea of an individuation, that an individual could reflect, could kind of cook their deepest experiences and begin to become conscious, so that you're not just taken by your personal history and go right around and around the same processes, but you have more of a sense of being conscious. Doesn't mean any of the stuff goes away. It does still keep going around, I think, at least it does for me. But that there's some kind of a deepening or maturity and also contact with maybe a deeper source, if you're lucky, that gives you that sense of orientation and direction in life. And so a question, can we imagine groups doing something like that, or communities working with, like a community individuation process? Can a community work with its collective history, with its inner conflicts? Not that the problems will go away, but to develop more creativity and consciousness in working with the problems we face as a society. And finding something like a deeper contact with the source that is coming through us as a community, and with a more creative orientation. Just have to catch up with myself. It's such a wide topic, really, and I just wanted to say, I'm going to be saying kind of a little menu to orient you, that I want to say a few thoughts and experiences of mine about that I'm going to be touching and sharing with you some experiences of people that we've been working with in communities in Croatia and former Yugoslavia. I want to introduce a little bit about process work, process-oriented psychology and its methods. And I'd love to go into one example more deeply and talk about that, and then close with a few quick thoughts about the outlook. But I had this idea that I wondered if we could if you'd mind or like to take a few minutes to orient with me more in an inner work way. Would you be up for like a 2 or 3 minute inner work? And if you don't feel like doing it, you don't need to. But I think it might be a way to also orient, not just listening, but to the question inside yourself. So if you'd like to, I'll just walk you through this. It'll take a few minutes. And if you don't like stuff like that, don't worry about it. Just follow yourself. So if you could just take a moment and maybe get comfortable in your chair, and as comfortable as you can. And take a moment to think about, if you'd like, your profession or your vocation, what you're involved in, what you're feeling called to be involved in. It might also come up a sense of a current task, either in a big picture sense or in a more immediate task. And you might want to close your eyes and just notice your breath, and check inside and feel your body for a moment. You might be able to recall what brought you into this field. It might be different things, but if you can recall maybe a moment where you felt an early sense of calling or a little experience. It could be a more recent one, it could be long ago, it could even be in childhood. And see if you could pick one, look around a little bit and pick one moment in time, one memory. It could be a conversation with someone or a book. Walk down the street and you thought, oh, maybe I'm going to do this, or something that touched you. And then go back into that memory in your mind's eye and look around there, or feel into it, look into it, and notice something that kind of attracts your attention. It could be something you've always remembered, or it could be something you've never noticed before. It could be like the color of someone's hair. It could be the way the light fell. It could be the way the tree caught your attention. Or a tone of voice. Just pick one thing that catches your attention there. And notice now the quality of that thing. If you can, might not be easy to name, but if you could name it in your mind in a word or two. And if you could express it in a hand gesture, or if you're shy to do that, also a pen on your paper, just a little line drawing that would express that quality. If you're lost, we're just picking up a moment, something that attracts us, finding its quality, and then just express that quality a little bit in a drawing or hand gesture. And if some of you are able to do that, to just catch a sense of its meaningfulness for you this morning. To recognize it as a part of your nature. And just as a last thing, if it's right for you and if you're there to bring this quality, see if it, from this quality, from it, that there's a message for yourself about your work. And if you have a message maybe for the world, or for some part of the world that you're drawn to working with. You might want to take a note for yourself if you had any experience that you want to remember about that. Sometimes those things, if you're able to do that, you're in a dreaming dimension and then you think you'll remember that and then it kind of goes away like a dream. So if you want to take a note, or a mental note. Okay, take another moment, and I'll follow my inner and outer pressures with time. Are some of you able to do that? Okay. My wish, I think, it's partly for me, that I wish to feel a sense of orientation together to the theme, and that makes it somehow worthwhile to you. So I'm going to, if I may, make the link back to this question of the collective becoming conscious of itself, or in the biggest sense we could think of it, or in a sense of a group or community or a organization in conflict, things like that. And this idea of learning to facilitate at a collective level, I just want to, this is again, it's quite a broad thing, but to be able to realize that can't just be a thing for a facilitator to come in and do, but we're talking about large-scale processes that are social, political, ecological, involving communications and media and social networking, but that it's also very much this spiritual idea of can we get off the wheel, and psychological grappling with awareness of ourselves so that we're not just repeating the cycles of the past, and how all of this links. And so again, I'm just kind of asking this question, what is the role of us, what is your role, what is the role of the field of psychology, transpersonal psychology, that recognizes itself as central to all of that? And I wanted to just give as a sort of example, a little example of how that might look for me, and also as a way of introducing some of our work in Croatia. And I'll tell it a bit as an experience we just had. We were in Croatia at this big sort of a do, I don't know what you call it, like a big event, that was a celebration of and closure of a part of our project there over many years. And we've been, first with a colleague of mine named Lane, and then with my husband Jean-Claude, we've been working there, and since the war in 1996, we went there and were meeting with large forums of people from maybe 50 to 90 people, usually on the larger size, people who had been on different ends of the war, Serbs, Croats, Muslims, people who had been very directly affected by the war personally, but who were themselves interested in being a part of reconstructing their communities. And they were faced with terrible problems, as you can imagine, in a post-war situation. And so they were gathering together to talk about how in the world they're going to go forward. And the gist of what we did is using the methods of process work and application to group or community work. We were supporting them to work among themselves on the issues they faced in the field. The idea that you can't just go out and talk about these things and go work on them, because you can't really work on things further than you've been able to process them yourselves. And so we would work together with, and at first it would be almost impossible to touch on these issues at all or to name them, and then they would come up, these big emotional polarizations, and transforming these together. And so the part of this recent project was that we were writing a summary of what we'd been doing in Croatia over the years. There were these forums, and then there was also a period in the recent years of linking the forum work with economic recovery projects in the region, linking it with training of facilitators who are in their communities trying to get things going, and then they run into polarizations of people blocking their work and stuff like that, how to facilitate that so that there's a way forward rather than staying enmeshed and entangled in these conflicts. And one of the key ideas of this was to have, that we described, is, again, it's seeing this work as central to the recovery of the reality. I mean, our work, but the idea of psychological, spiritual work, processing conflict in the community, that it's not something that's just a little side issue, like these people are suffering from trauma, so they better meet together, or wow, they have some conflict, someone should help them resolve it and get on with the real work. But to realize that this is the real work, to create a kind of, we called it like a relational infrastructure, to use that word, because usually after war, people come in, they're looking for electricity, housing, roads, and of course all that stuff is absolutely necessary, but to look at this also at that level of being absolutely critical to recovery in a post-conflict situation. And we were presenting all of this, and I just want to say it was a pleasure, but also because it supports it, I think, that there was such a buzz around it. There were a whole bunch of people from the communities there who'd been involved in these economic projects and involved in these forums, and very grassroots. The people who came to these forums were everything from mayors of villages to young people involved with the youth center to very grassroots to heads of international organizations. They were all sort of working together. And at this event also were dignitaries there, like the head of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, who was very involved with this project and very enthusiastic, and the head of the EU for that region, and the Deputy Prime Minister of the country, and people from the President's office, and they were jumping up and talking and really getting it in the sense that this is a sense of making a difference towards a hopefulness that it's possible to recover and also to not repeat so much the cycles of violence. And I just wanted to give a little sense of what it's like. I always find it hard to give an experience of what it's like in this work, and I wanted to try that. But I was just thinking this morning of in an early forum that we were in the middle of very heated interactions, and I had to take a short break, and I was literally talking to some people, and then I had to literally run to the loo and back. You have to say running in and running back to be back on time to facilitate. And as I was running back, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I realized I was totally happy. I was just kind of joyous, and I thought, so I could say, well, what does that have to do with me, that in the middle of all of this incredible, horrible, difficult work, I'm so joyous? But on the other hand, what I realized was that the people were, not joyous wouldn't be quite the right word yet, but there was this deep sense of relief and happiness to be addressing the stuff that is so depressing and so giving such a hopeless outlook for the future. And the thought that we could begin to address it, even when it was still very tense, made people feel uplifted in a sense. And I wanted to try to explain that. And then I went on in my own thinking a lot during the next couple of years and all since then, and it's the topic of my book, War Hotel, but to really look at when these dynamics are not processed, that they remain as fuel for future violence, and that how you can really perceive this, it's the collective trauma from the past generations that there was never a chance to process. Or never a way to process. And in a way you could say there never will be, it's a whole topic about collective trauma, but to be able to somehow begin to address that, open issues of justice and accountability. It's more and more now that's beginning to happen, like with tribunals, truth commissions, things like this, but that it's also needed at a more grassroots level, that communities can grapple with issues of accountability. And also to recognize emotional traits in oneself and in the community that aren't necessarily bad, like your need for safety, that can easily be manipulated as a terror tactic, that you're in danger by somebody who wants you to go to their side, or crack down, to create a sense of terror in order to crack down, or loyalty, beautiful emotions of loyalty. This would come up, that people felt so loyal, but in being loyal to their own group, were a part of the violence. Or altered states even. It's interesting in relation to our work here that the urge to transcend something ordinary and to feel connected to a bigger sense of meaning and a bigger sense of purpose, if unconscious, can easily be worked up into sort of nationalist types. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's this related urge that can be worked up into sort of nationalist movements. And at the same time, all of these things, when facilitated in our experience, can be the stuff of community building, kind of in the way of what Larry was saying, that you go through difficulties and sadness, and that cooks you and transforms you, that even these most difficult experiences at a collective level can be transforming if there's a chance to work with them. So I wanted to say a little bit about process work, so make a little bit of a shift, if I may. Am I okay? Are you following me? Okay. Now, there's so much, it's difficult, isn't it, to define or talk about work. People say, what's that? And I go, ooh, I can't quite say it because there's a lot to say. So I'm going to try to present that in what I call sometimes a plum jam version. You know, when you take a lot of plums and you put them in a pot and they keep cooking down and down and you get to some kind of an essence. And it seems like you can put a lot of plums in there and try to say it in a shorter way. So process work was, as Jessica said that my husband and I have been, Jean-Claude, or really he began founding this school of process work in the UK, and together we've been kind of elders, leaders in that school. But Arnie Mindell is the person who developed process work. We call it process work or process-oriented psychology. And he was originally a physicist, and then a Jungian, and he's a great guy if you have a chance to attend. Has anybody met the Mindells? So he's very playful. He's very much of a research, has very much of a research spirit. One of the things I loved was that he would always, that there's really a very exciting, which I won't be able to go into all of it, but a very simple and beautiful and set of concepts and skills that are useful for facilitating in a lot of situations. And if those methods were not useful in a particular situation, he'd revise the methods. That kind of a research mind. And I used to actually be embarrassed to talk about all the range of applications, because how is that possible? These things should all be separate. But there's a really wide range, working with individuals, working with organizations, working in these community forums, in conflict resolution settings, a lot of work with body symptoms, illness, people in extreme states with psychiatric diagnoses. There's been a lot of very, very interesting work with that. And it's been an area close to my heart, as is working with people in deeply withdrawn states, such as comas. And I wish I could speak. It was very exciting, but it's about following the process, helping a person through very subtle communication methods to get access to their dreaming, even in such a state. And we see extraordinary cases of awakening from a coma, and coming out, or being relieved and dying near the end of life after that work. If anybody wants to talk to me about that, I can later. But Arnie started his interesting relation to David Fontana, that process work, or he began his ideas by working with people who were dying. And maybe I'll tell a little story that will make sense of the theory in this plum jam version. He was working with a guy who was very ill with a stomach tumor. And as a Jungian, as some of you may know, like you work with a dream, and if you amplify the dream will lead you. It will find its own. The dream carries like a pattern for your individuation, or it carries the pattern forward. It reveals its own meaning. So he thought, what if you would amplify a body symptom? Now, I can do this every day because I learned it from him, but it was a new thought. Okay, what if I amplified this guy's experience of the body symptom? So he said, go ahead and feel that more. And the guy said, I feel like it's just growing. There's pressure. It's growing. And then he suddenly went, I feel like it could just burst. And then he goes, I remember a dream. I dreamed last night about fireworks exploding. And it was Independence Day. And then Arnie kind of went, he saw this connection, the bursting, the fireworks, and then helped the guy to express himself, to sort of burst out with his feelings and temperament and passion and stuff like that. And this guy had been identified as very identified with a part of his personality that is more reserved, let's say. More of his identity. And then this dreaming process that's over like an edge of your identity, or a belief system that's circling your identity. Your dreaming process is carrying new information about the evolution of your self. And he then got the idea and sort of coined this term dream body. I hate pens that don't work. It's one of my things. Oh well. He coined the term dream body to mean that there's this dreaming process. It's a dreaming process that manifests through the dream, the nighttime dream. But it's not the same thing. The dreaming process manifests through the symptoms. You begin to study how it manifests in different channels of awareness and communication. So it manifests through your movements. It manifests through body sensation. It manifests through the auditory channel in unintended auditory information. or unintended signals in your gestures. And you could begin to track and follow how this dreaming process is at any moment accessible through looking at our signals, our dreams, our symptoms, and things like this. It was very exciting. And then this moved on, developed into an idea, so I'm really kind of jumping to a global dream body or dreaming field that is not just about my personal process, but where you could begin to see how there's a field that is moving couples or field that's moving whole organizations and structuring their interactions. And so we're working in a way facilitating, as in-process work is about unfolding that dreaming field, you could say. And recently he's using more the word process mind to mean that there's like a mind, that there's that wisdom that's in that dreaming field, and you're helping to facilitate it. So it goes along with what different people have been speaking about, that sense of an innate consciousness, but that needs our awareness. Because when it's just acting out on its own is maybe wise, but also stupid. It gets you, yeah? You know what I mean? You're getting into it is not, if there's no consciousness in it, those things move us, but we aren't present in it. I'll show more what I mean about that in a moment. The other thing is that, quickly, is that, I just want to name a couple things. The orientation is basically creative, if you're familiar with Jung, kind of based in this teleological or final orientation, that you don't just look back to what is the cause of a symptom or a dream or a problem, but where is it leading us? And then also looks in terms of 3 dimensions, that you're perceiving. The consensus reality dimension is what you've been calling your kind of everyday reality content, the words I'm saying. The dreamland are this material that's coming up in our dreams and our symptoms, in the more unintended signals, subtle feelings, subjective experiences, but also in kind of archetypal roles moving us, like the oppressor and the oppressed, I'm trying to limit myself here. And then Arnie also speaks then about a sentient dimension or essence dimension that would be beneath those polarities of the dreaming level, dreaming dimension, something that's more, that you experience more through very subtle flickers and intuitions and atmosphere, and what many might experience, at least is linked to spiritual experiences, often connected to that dimension. And the last thing I just want to say about the work that's a useful concept to at least name is deep democracy. And that's the idea that all parts are needed for there to be a way forward. So there's democracy, which represents different views, but it's a deeper democracy that includes stuff that's usually marginalized. Like that doesn't belong here, or this, and includes the different dimensions. So that it includes the different viewpoints on a consensus reality, let's say, if you're in a meeting or whatever, but it also includes the underlying feelings, the underlying polarizations that aren't quite being named, and this underlying essence dimension that's really linking us and uniting us. And it's interesting that all those dimensions, I think, are needed, because sometimes, if you jump to one without the other, like if you just do consensus reality conclusion, let's say in a negotiation, the stuff at the other levels will come up and the conflict will come back. Or even if people say, well, let's transcend and go to an essence dimension and love each other, if the dreamland dimension's not processed, it might be bound to come back again. That's one idea that you need. I mean, I'm saying it too simply, but the idea that at some level all of these dimensions are needed. So I know I kind of raced through that, but I'm going to move on and just want to also bring up, because we're talking about consciousness and stuff, and I can't possibly go into this, but just name a few things that also link with what you've been talking about in the last couple of days too. But when you look up, let's say you look up collective consciousness on Google or something, some interesting things will come up around collective behavior. If you think of beautiful studies about collective behavior of birds and different animals, you can think of that in terms of dance, beautiful aspects of collective consciousness in us. That's not just a bunch of individuals moving, but it's collective. But also there's the idea of a group mind, like riots have a group mind, or mass consciousness, where there's very unconscious or archetypal stuff seizes us and there's no awareness in the process that's moving us. So also Jung, again, who of course spoke about the collective unconscious, these patterns driving us in the background and the need for them to be conscious. Then the religious and spiritual notions of consciousness, like God, like process mind, Gaia. Again, these are all different, but again, coming to this idea of the wisdom underlying, a collective wisdom of some sort. Vedic philosophy of a field of consciousness. Thinking also about how these are very new ideas that sort of on the avant-garde of thinking about consciousness, and yet they're the oldest ideas, which again has been touched on here. Indigenous wisdom, that elders would sit together and kind of hash out what is, and discern what is the direction of our community. Or an individual kind of breaks away from the mainstream of her or his community, a shamanic person who goes through all sorts of wild states and dreams and body symptoms and kind of leaves the community to go through an inner transformative process at the edge of society, but then brings it back, or the edge of the tribe, and brings it back, brings the information, the knowledge that was spoken about here, bringing that back to the community. And also, I just think at least needs to be named here the different political diversity and cultural diversity in terms of thinking about collective consciousness versus individual consciousness. A lot of our colleagues are from former communist countries where they grew up thinking in terms of the collective. But of course with a lot of serious loss of personal freedoms. And then on the other side, having very individualistic cultures more in the West, where we think it's a new idea to think about the collective. So I'm just going to take, that's such a broad stroke of things, but just to recall, remind ourselves there's so much in the field around it. But I want to take it back to the more practical work we're doing. And when we address a group, we're not talking to them about collective consciousness or something like that, but we're addressing them as having wisdom inside of them as a group. So we might sit with a group and let them know that we know that the wisdom and the way forward, in spite of all the difficulties, is inside of them, that we're going to need to include all of the parts, even those that are usually marginalized, and people tend to get this idea also of dimensions. People readily get, like we work with, whether it's a group of nuns or gang kids or business, across the board, I think people kind of, it looks first kind of like maybe it's the words and you think, oh, that's a bit, non-ordinary or something. But everybody gets that there's one level that's about what we're talking about, and then there's this other thing going on where there's this polarization in the background, and that there's some kind of a deeper something that connects all of us. And they like that you're looking out for all of those different dimensions. And also particularly that we mention hotspots, which are points that everybody knows about, like if you're in a meeting or in these situations of conflict. You know what they're like when you touch a moment comes up and everybody kind of goes, yeah? Could be there's a little giggle, and then or it could be a little zing, something a little nasty, and everybody went over it. You know what I'm talking about? They're hot spots. They're points. We all have them all the time in our group life and also inside. But they are hugely important because these moments, we tend to back away from them. But when you back away from them repeatedly, they just reoccur. And the hot spot, we can kind of just really study that very exactly in a system, that is where conflict will escalate and cycle, where volatility happens. And so if you ignore it, it's not the best idea. But if you just kind of go in there and go, let's go there, people don't want to go there. So to really be able to talk to people, we're going to see those moments, and we're going to go in them very carefully and with awareness and facilitate in those moments. And then I sometimes describe hotspots as a kind of doorway to between the history and the future. They're the spot where everything cycles, and we got the same story going around. But if you go through that doorway carefully and process things, it can be a doorway to kind of transformation and deepening, at least a deepening of awareness and contact together. And also, I just wanted to name that knowing about hotspots and these different dimensions is useful to the facilitator. So it's a big topic in itself. But so the facilitator doesn't just fall into the process you're trying to facilitate. If there's a polarization of roles where people think this, woof, 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 and then people on this side say, no, 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 and you're on this side, you don't think you are, you think you're neutral facilitator, but if you're not really, which you're not, because we all are part of things, then without knowing that, you easily fall in the soup. So I wanted to just maybe give a sense of how this looks like in an example and go a little deeper before coming to a closure. And just kind of tell a story. Oh, maybe I wanted to show you also, I think this work has also been used, it's interesting, you might be interested. We do world work seminars where some 400 people come through, 200 to 400 people come together from 30 some countries where different world issues are being worked on in the center in this way. And it's quite a crazy and profound experience. We had one in London a couple of years ago and just wanted to show kind of photograph of that. They were working on issues of racism and attitudes towards indigenous people. Let's get kind of a visual picture of that. That's Amy Mindell, actually. And here, that's an old photo of an early forum. But I wanted to tell a story that I hope will make this more and more sense of it for you. So one afternoon, we're in a forum, and it's near the end of the day, and people are just talking about some subjects that may come up for the next day. So it seems kind of relatively light conversation, some of this. And so somebody says, one of the things they're suffering from in their community that they'd like to focus on is when they have a good idea, they put it forward and everybody kind of poo-poos it and blocks it, and it never happens, and they feel burned out. And people going, yeah, and that was the issue. And then there was a little bit of laughter going on in one corner. We didn't quite notice it. Looked like having fun. And then we came to a close of the day. And after the session, as we were going out, a woman came up to us, or someone told us she was extremely upset. And we said, well, what's going on? And she said, well, she was her first forum, and it was like the first day, I think. And she said, these guys are making sarcastic comments, and I won't be in a room with somebody doing that, and I can't be here, I have to go. And so we said, look, if you want to go, of course, you're free to go, and that's your choice and important. But if you'd like to stay, you're very welcome, and we can talk about it further or whatever. So it was quite short, and we went on to do our work and tried to study what happened there, that at this moment that it upset her so much, and this sarcastic humor, apparently, I hadn't even caught it as sarcastic, had hit a hot spot. Remember I was saying this hot spot that had then upset her. So we worked on the process and tried to think of a way forward and made a plan for the next day. And I think I wasn't completely sure about it. And I went to sleep, and in the middle of the night, I woke up drenched in sweat. From head to toe, I was just completely drenched in sweat. And I was upset. I thought I was maybe very ill or what was going on. And then I kind of did some inner work, and I realized that I was terrified. And then I was trying to figure out, what the hell am I terrified about? I know I can get scared of groups if I don't know what I'm doing. You want to study, know what's going on. But not like that. And then I suddenly remembered this sense of this field, and that what I'm carrying belongs to the field, it's not just my own. And that if I'm terrified, that's in relation to a role that's creating that terror. And of course, here we are in the field after the war in Croatia, where there was a hell of a lot of terror and terror tactics and people being expelled and ethnic cleansing. And I don't know how familiar you are anymore with all what happened there. But I recalled, of course, this may be the field that we're in. And then I thought, this topic that they brought up that seemed so simple, is my idea going to be welcomed, was touching on a deeper level, am I going to be welcomed in my community, or am I going to be expelled or killed or terrorized? So I thought that there might be this connection. So the next morning I said a very simple thing, just framed it, said that it was an important conversation yesterday. It might link to deeper issues about inclusion and exclusion and even much more serious issues of trauma and terror that have been in this community. Said it. And this woman who had been so upset yesterday, she said, "Can I speak?" We said, "Sure." And she stood up and she walked to the middle of the room and she began to speak and said that during the war she'd been basically taken away for 2 days. She'd been threatened and terrorized and tortured and threatened with her life, that she was going to be disappeared, meaning killed, from her community. And after 2 days, they'd let her go and she'd gone home. But she'd never told anybody what had happened to her in these 2 days. And so, but the story didn't come out so quickly. She was haltingly telling the story. And we went with her and, gave her support and time and to tell her story if she wanted to speak, and choice. And then at a certain moment we said to her, using this concept of roles, excuse me for wasting the paper here, but I think I want to... we asked her, can we represent the role that is making you so terrified? Because even now as you're speaking, it's still somehow here that you're not feeling fully welcomed now. And so it might be useful to welcome you, but also to represent what is not welcoming you. So we represent the role. It's a way we might work. So we stood up and got her permission to do that. And represented it first in a way of saying there's a role in the there was a role in the collective that said, I'm going to kill you. Leave. You don't belong here. Disappear or I'm going to kill you. And then we said, but wait, this role might also be present in the room of somebody who doesn't want you to speak now. Does that make sense? So then, because this role has different aspects to it. It's the role from the war, but it's the role now. It's still a role that says, I don't want you to speak. And then we dreamed into it, well, maybe that role saying, I don't want you to speak because it's just too difficult to hear. I don't want to hear another story. There was a lot of that. I don't need to hear another story. Everybody's got a story like yours. Get out of here. So I sort of named that. So we sometimes will sort of play it, not in any mocking way, but in a way of accessing what might be unspeakable. Does that make sense? And then somebody jumped in from the outside. He says, can I speak? I want to speak there personally. And he said, I can't listen to you because of all the people, all my friends who are underground who will never be able to tell their stories. And so then, of course, a lot of people begin to kind of weep and or feel that. It's like and he said, but then he said, the only way I'll ever be able to express that is if I would go to the main square and set myself on fire. He said that. And my colleague was actually able to work with him there in movement a little while, which is quite extraordinary. He began to, because we don't usually, you have to follow the language of the group you're in. These people had never been anything psychological in their life. It was, they were just community folks. But began to dance this outrage and pain. And then the guy who'd upset her so much came in, the one who'd been sarcastic, and he just walked in the middle, and he stood next to her, and he said, I'm really sorry I upset you. And he was a Serb, and she was a Croat. And then he said, speak, tell the rest of your story. She began to tell it more, and then he promised her he would stay there from the same region, and he promised her he'd stay close to her when they went back home and make her feel that she could, So the whole thing was incredibly moving for her and very healing for her personally, but also I'm trying to tell that story also that it's healing for the community to go through that. That those sorts of traumatic experiences don't only belong in a private practice. They do also when people want to speak privately, but they belong as part of a collective healing, grappling process. Just a couple more things I wanted to say about that. If it's okay, it's quite a moving story, but as a way of trying to understand it also, in that one way of understanding the roles is that it's like having a conversation with yourself. You ever see someone walking down the street and they're going talking to themselves, yeah? And it's like these roles are having it out with each other. Or you do it yourself. You wake up in the night. Do you do that? In the middle of the night, go into the loo and suddenly you're, you stupid. And then the other party, hey, don't treat me like that. Am I not the only one? Yeah, you sometimes have these sort of terrible things going on and these roles that are working at each other without a lot of awareness. Or if you're doing inner work, you might inhabit those things more consciously inside. That in a way, that's like an inner dialogue that needs to happen. So at a collective level, these roles are also interacting with each other. And so what we're really doing in that work, one thing we're doing is bringing kind of humanity and consciousness into those roles. When somebody, you can play them first, you might be able to play and dream into them, or at a certain moment somebody is very personal, like this guy was, and could speak personally from the role, and that was transformative. Does that make sense? And that the key things that are really useful to that is that the role is bigger than the individual. It's just such a useful idea. The role needs more than one individual. So if we're working, we'll say that. It's not just for one person to take this side and the other that side, but the role is bigger than that. It needs different people to fill out all its facets and to make it conscious. But also, an individual is bigger than a role. That's really relieving. People hate to be in only one role. And we all do it. We get stuck and identified with one spot. But ultimately, we hate it. It makes you feel isolated and typed in a certain way. And so people like the freedom to realize that they are identified with that role at a certain moment, but could also take the other role. So this isn't like role-playing, but it's more like understanding the underlying structure and bringing it awareness. Yeah, then the roles are non-local is another useful idea. They're inside of you, like they were in me in the night, and they're inside of the woman, and they're inside of the group. Does that make sense? They appear at all of those different levels. So I just wanted to come to a closure pretty soon here. Yeah, I don't have time to really go into that. Maybe I'll just say one thing that people tended to feel entranced by the whole violent conflict, and I think we all have that. We tend to get entranced, and kind of what I mean by sort of like we're just in it. We're in those roles. We're just caught in it. And they really felt that, and there was this sense that they were all sense that everybody was a victim, and they were all victims. And there was manipulation, a terrible manipulation of people in this region for the ends of some who wanted that to happen. But there would tend to be, like if there was a fight, one person would say, or not a fight, it's a wrong word, when there was a very wrong word, somebody wanting conflict, where somebody's saying, I need you to stand up and say what happened on the other side. I need accountability. I need to tell my story and have someone say, I did that. And then on the other side, they couldn't, because they had another story, and I don't know if you know the complexity of the war, which I can't go into right now, but that both were victims of each other at different points of the war and so on. And all from the whole system say, I need to tell my story and I need you to take accountability. So the role of the one who has any accountability or responsibility is very difficult to fill. And one of the things that would tend to happen in this work would be that would shift. And in one guy, I wanted to just say this also in view of the transpersonal spirit we have here, that you could sense, like with an individual who can really transcend their personal history, and you get that sense of a deep contact with life and the universe or themselves, we would feel that in the groups, that their personal history would then drop away and they would feel a sense of deep humanity with each other and a deep sense of hope. And but around this accountability always touched me that how often that would come up as a big learning or sense of shift. When I remember one soldier who sat there and said, I'd been in the war, it never even occurred to me in my life that I was a part of it, that I wasn't just a victim of the situation. Never occurred to me. And then he went, well, maybe it's because I didn't want to feel guilty. But he says, I don't feel guilty. I feel a sense, this makes me feel a sense of empowerment, and that I can make a difference in my community when I'm not just identifying as it all just sort of happened to me. And we would see that again and again, that people would say, could we dare to dream? Several people said this after the forums. Could we dare to dream what would have happened if we could have had these forums before the war? The possibility that going through that together, they wouldn't have been able to be pulled apart so dramatically. And it's a big dream, but I know, I believe it's possible. It's about scale also, but that you could see these people, the more they work on those, the more they're able to facilitate in those situations rather than just feel taken. A group from the project, or a group of people who were in those forums have started a project together with our organization C4, and where they're going to bring back some of the people who've been in these forums and film and write a book and do a website. And their goal is to record those stories, record what it was like for people who felt they were just taken along and participated in this thing without feeling any awareness, but what it's like for them now reflecting on it, and people who did very heroic things and found their way. I can't say it very well, really more, it's the complexity of it, that they want to record the complexity of history and reflection and awareness with the idea of giving something to future generations, that it doesn't just go down as another history story, it was this side, that side, that it's not so simple. So it's an exciting project that we're doing just now. For me personally, I was thinking, I get a bit excited when I speak about this, and it comes from a hopefulness that that it really is possible to make a difference, that this level of pain and trauma that we have in this world could shift by bringing awareness along that we can do it, that we're young still as human beings, and that we could do that. And then I think that brings up the other side that could get hopeless, and you think, oh God, you read the news and you don't even know what's going on, and I can't even get my dishes out of my sink, and my own taxes paid, or something. And I get to a sense of also on the other side that feeling, that of a hopelessness perhaps. And then I think for me, what is interesting, and I'd like to hope it's also for the field, that it's not just about being really hopeful or being hopeless. Like in a relationship, you grow beyond being hopeful and hopeless, but that you're kind of engaged for the long haul. And that I'd hope our profession will have a lot of dialogue and learning and developing in that way to stay involved with the larger field for the long haul. And this morning I found this quote, so I'll leave it so it's not me, but from one of the participants, about this issue of responsibility, but I think it also touched something much deeper than that. She said, responsibility, it was so unfamiliar and complex. It penetrated into me during the forum like a wet knife into a large birthday cake. The cake, that's me. I didn't actually expect such a pleasure to be cut up and served to others. The feeling of togetherness, of a sense of community, is a feeling of responsibility for others and for yourself. No one is spared. There's nobody on the sidelines. We're all in it. Nice, no? So I thought I'd leave it with her. So thank you. And maybe we have a few moments to talk together or ask a question or give me your thoughts on all of this. Thank you.
Arlene, I just want to say how glad I am that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I invited you, but I have this real sense that there was a calling, and I was just the messenger. I really have this feeling of there is a keynote, but there's also the underlying dynamic, and you're here not just because of the keynote. I think there is other stuff underneath, and I think
the dreaming underneath is working.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Something to do with the future of
absolutely,
the
yes, the future of the section. I think you touched a lot. I feel very touched personally by your presentation. I've always felt a great resonance with your work.
Thank you.
But also in relation to us here at this weekend, in relation to transpersonal psychology as a field, I really sense there is something very important that you touched on here in your presentation today.
Thank you.
So I feel it's really important to give voice to you so that you have a chance to engage with Arlene. Is there anybody who would like to make a start?
Please.
Yes, I would also like to thank you for that. It's very important work that you're doing. This notion of the collective is something that I'm very, very interested in, and the idea that, whatever, how can I put it, wherever you feel yourself to be, both individually and maybe in an organization or whatever, there is always another scale. There is always something larger.
Yes.
And that's, you mentioned individuation. In a way, I think that is the evolution, that is the drive. If we can just see, what was that? Someone, I think it was Larry, gave this image of everyone's in the mist.
Yes, yeah.
We can just see a little bit larger, and
to realize that your own individuation is part of a larger story.
There's always something larger. So that's a prefix to the point I want to raise and ask you a question. Because I have my own reasons for being interested in the wars of the 20th century, or even I would say the war of the 20th century. There's one war, and actually I've talked about that in different contexts, in the context of this conference before. And so much of our collective, of the shaping of our age, is down to what happened between 1914 and 1945, but it didn't end there, right?
Yeah.
And I just wonder, this is what was going through my mind, there you are in Serbia. You're interested in this sense of the larger scale of things. So the question is, was that part of it? Did you, because, the origins of the war, the 20th, is right there. And it's as if there's a healing. It seems there's a healing that is required at that huge level. Was that part of being there? Was that something that was important for you?
I think there's different things to say about that,
Yeah,
but what is huge. One thing very concretely is that this history would come up. Somebody might be coming there suddenly arguing about what happened in this month of this year between this village and that village, very specific. And then in literally moments, they could end up back in the 14th century. And a lot of people commented on this. I think I was mentioning the other day that you could sometimes ask about the news, what was going on, and you couldn't find it, like journalists, but they could always know what would happen in 1389, for example. And there was whole mythologies that were worked up. And yet, in the interim period, people were living together very happily. A huge rate of mixed marriage, people not even knowing who's who, what ethnicity or whatever. And then this stuff all kind of got pulled back up and reworked like a kind of fuel that was waiting there. So, and in terms of Europe, just to quickly say, I don't want to speak too much more because maybe someone else has something to say, but we have a program at C4 called Europe Matters, and we've been getting support from the European Union to do this, meeting with large forums with people from different countries in Europe to work on just this. What is to process the history in relation to our future as multicultural societies. So whether looking at the colonial history and violence of Europe, or looking at World War I, World War II, looking at working with the Stalin, the Holocaust, and on and on and on. And we've had very profound experiences, like around the former communist stuff. People haven't had a chance to process that much yet, to sit and to really tell those stories of what happened to them. What their parents went through, to even find a voice, because part of that was that you weren't allowed to speak about it, and to be able to do these things in group settings, not just sort of in a privacy of that's also important, but also in a collective setting. So something I'm very interested in too. Maybe is the better answer. But, yeah.
I want to ask you about the word process. And I suppose it's a philosophical problem I have with it. That if I think of process, I think of, there used to be some things in England called processed peas. And it meant that the thing had gone through
kind of ruined
the milk
it.
you put in your coffee has been homogenized. It's a process.
It's great.
So, and it implies that there is in existence a process that you put something through, and it comes out the other end, and it's right.
And not right, but mushy.
Okay, you may not like it. You may
bland.
Like it, but it's what you intended to get. You know, you superheat the peas.
This shouldn't be the idea. If I'm bringing that across, that's my own limits, because that shouldn't be like that. But I agree with you.
But I don't want to. But those are both negative examples. But for example, I want to get more to the psychological process. If a problem, a deep pain, is not processed, and I took your point entirely, then it
recycles.
It recycles, it amplifies, and it goes on causing problems. So we've got to process it. But when you say it's got to be processed, I feel there's an implication that there is a way of processing.
A right way, or we should be.
Well, a right way.
We should finally become good, or something.
I'm not for one moment suggesting that you are saying there's only one way. I know that. That would be hopelessly too critical. But
probably do have a bit of that, because I get excited about my own way.
But maybe there are many ways.
But I don't really believe it.
There are many ways, I'm sure. But what worries me is that, just from my own experience, I can think of processing something in therapy that went on for years. And a week ago, that same thing was still there. Now, does that mean the process hasn't worked?
Well, that's a big question. Because there's also times to stop. There is time to put things aside and say, we're moving on.
But do you see my problem with the word process?
Yes, I do. I basically agree with you. It's a complicated word to use. But also just about that, like in creative stuff that Jessica was such a beautiful sharing with us her work yesterday. A lot of times creative artists would sort of stay away from psychology because they're afraid that it would become like mush if you worked on things. And I think that's interesting, but I don't really think so. I think that the kind of process that I hope that I'm talking about is getting more differentiated or more aware doesn't make it good or right. Unfortunately, even it's not going to be like that you can take away the problems or take away the pain or become good or something like this. It's bringing more awareness. Take your point.
You have rung lots of bells. I work for an NGO which does development work particularly in Russian-speaking countries, CIS. And all of our projects in whatever field of health or social care find that they bring together those who, in these former communist countries, hitherto had not spoken together, whether that's in infection control or safe motherhood or what.
Can you speak just a little louder?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And
that they haven't had a chance to talk together.
That they bring them together.
They bring them together.
This is a novel experience because, like Hitler's Germany, the Communist Party sundered. It compartmentalized ministries and so on, and that compartmentalization went down into society. But you actually bring to mind my very first visit to Russia, 29 years ago, and walking in this Western Russian city, and some lines of Schiller's Ode to Joy springing into my mind, and with apologies to native German speakers here. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mörder string getan, set by Beethoven in the Ninth Symphony. Your magic binds together what stern custom separates. But actually, I want to talk about Afghanistan, where we've been working the last 6 years, because we're working in a district, a mountainous district, where these very poor people, subsistence farmers, were fighting each other. They'd had 23 years of war. These villages, you might have thought, would have everything to gain from cooperating. Were fighting each other, and even laying landmines. And this was not on the basis of religion, they're all Shia, not on the basis of tribe, although there are a variety of tribes. It was something much more superficial. But the fighting goes on. We have come across that this year because we've been working at providing clean water. And they're fighting over it. And it carries on right down, the distrust carries right down into villages.
Yes.
We've been talking with them, not me, I'm not there, but, about providing grain storage.
Providing what?
Grain storage,
Oh, yeah.
so they can sell their crops collectively, store them collectively. And they want it individually within villages because one villager doesn't trust another. So it's pernicious, this distrust.
Yes. Thank you.
I think we can take maybe 5 more minutes because, I mean, such a fascinating topic and the coffee break is quite long.
People will soon be ready for
and the
coffee.
will just be outside. So
No, I just wanted to say when we were talking about the process and, I feel it's really important to give people the opportunity to really to say their story and to have that process, but also to hold at the same time that level of dreaming and daring to dream the dream and to, as you were saying, and how that can balance things out and not leave people just sitting in the pain.
That's it, yeah. It's how do you, I think what you're bringing up that I didn't speak about here, or you go ahead and finish first.
No, I mean, that's what I was thinking, is exactly as you were saying, it's holding all the levels.
Yeah. It's how do you do it without just falling back in it again?
Yeah.
We'll get to groups and there'll always be a part that says, I don't want to go back into this trauma, we're just going to rework the same old stuff, like you're saying, and they're right.
Yeah.
If that's just going to be what's happening, and what we'll do is bring voice to that, support that side. Let's not do it, and then another side that does want to do it. So but that can talk together really about that. How will we find a way that is right for us?
Yeah.
Has choice. That isn't just feeling like you're dragged through the same stuff. There's a time when you have to let things go and move on, and there's a time and choice of when to revisit and try to process it further. Those are big questions.
Yeah, and really sensing that timing of how long. That just going in and just recycling it. And
that's not the idea.
No.
Yeah.
And holding both. But I just to end, I just really want to acknowledge you and the work. It's just...
Thank you.
It's just so amazing. I'm really deeply moved by everything you are doing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for saying so. But it's something we share together, that dream, yeah.
Just very quickly, because I know we're going for the coffee. I'd like to amplify what you just said about bringing up a lot of things that I've been noticing. But sometimes we don't notice within our own cultures things that need issues that need to be sorted and haven't been sorted for centuries.
Yeah.
And I'll just a little anecdote. I was in North Carolina a few years ago on July the 4th, and my New England friends asked me not to speak. And I said, why? I don't understand. You'll know when you get there. And I went to the little village, North Carolina, there. And I spoke, and somebody said, oh, there's an English woman. And that was it. Now, this is centuries old. Yeah. And they didn't speak because they had sort of New England accents. So that was the problem there.
Yeah. You don't have to go far from your back door for any of this. You don't have to project it into Yugoslavia.
Thank you very much for speaking.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking about it.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was fascinating. And I particularly like the connection with Mum in the library. I loved it. I would have liked to hear more about that. But my question is really about the 3 dimensions of Mendel, I believe. So the first one was consensus reality. The second one was dreamland. And if you could just expand a little bit about the third one.
Sentient or essence dimension. Yeah, it's if the dreamland dimension is more it's the dreaming information that manifests through symptoms, dreams, signals. I think I was mentioning to you the other day, but like if somebody let's say I'm speaking to you and my intention is to meet you and to speak clearly and to express myself, but another part of me is kind of signaling away. It might mean because there's something I'm not quite aware of, that I'm quite introverted or inside myself. And I might be dreaming at night, let's say, about being in a cave. Okay? So that's that dreaming kind of process, these different parts of ourselves. Whereas the sentient dimension refers to something that kind of underlies, is sentient or essence dimension is the words we use for it, but something that is, it's not something, and it's, it's maps, it's not like one place, but it's the sense of processes that transcend, in a way, those polarizations, and where you pick up very subtle flickers, very subtle signals that are not yet sort of pre-signals. So you could say that level precedes, one way I think of it is it precedes the dreaming. It's like the source from which things arise. And it can be a dimension that you kind of return to after you've processed stuff, where you have that sense of the polarization now is dropped away and we're sharing a kind of common field together. I hope that kind of touches it.
One more question.
Okay, I'm worried about people's break also. I appreciate all the need to talk because it belongs to all of us. But
a personal and a collective thing. On a personal level, I appreciate you brought different words to something I've been doing. I used to call it self-awareness, and you're here for a reason when I work with a group. I like process work. I like that. On a collective level, I very much appreciate that you're verbalizing also things we don't often speak about. And your work in Croatia particularly. And this is maybe a request or suggestion or hope to everyone. Maybe this evening when we talk also a bit about our section, we can talk, well, what can we actually do? Because to me it feels you do something on the transpersonal which in that way becomes manifested and tangible. And that is to me about how we can bring the transpersonal forward. It's very important. I would appreciate if people come tonight.
It's great. Are you speaking tonight?
No.
I
speak later on.
Lunch. Yeah. It's great. Sounds, yes.
Thank you very much, Arlene.
Thank you
so much for your
Thanks,
time.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.